Okay, now we're also recording. Let's wait 1 more minute and then we're good to go. Okay. All right, we're on time. So I would like to welcome everyone here on the panel and in the audience that you joined our webinar, What Works and What Doesn't Work in Climate Change Mitigation. I'm very glad we had so many registrations, over 300, I think so, over the course of the webinar. I think there will be more people joining. It's actually the first webinar we host in English. My name is Sophie Markitan. I'm representing the Energy Watch Group. We are a non-profit think tank dedicated to accelerating political action towards renewable energy and climate protection through scientific analysis, policy advice, and dialogue. So our vision is a zero emissions world, and we pave scientific ways to get there. And I'm glad to have three remarkable guests on stage. That's Aditi Shaw. She is the Director of Climate Philanthropy at Impatience Earth. Impatience Earth provides pro bono advice to donors seeking support to support organizations, ideas, and individuals working to address the climate crisis. And she previously worked at various social enterprises and nonprofits across food systems, social justice, and education sectors, with a focus on building out their operations and strategy. And I also welcome Mark Jacobson. He is the professor for civil and environmental engineering at Stanford University and the director of Stanford's Atmosphere and Energy Program. In his research, he develops large-scale clean renewable energy solutions to global warming and air pollution. And in a recent study, he showed that a transition to 100% renewables by 2035 is not only possible, but also beneficial in terms of social and economic costs. And last but not least, Hans-Josef Fell. He has been fighting for consistent climate action for over 50 years. He used to be a member of the German Bundestag for the Green Party. And in this role, he co-authored the Renewable Energy Sources Act, the EEG, which is considered the legal prototype for the expansion of renewable energies worldwide, and has been replicated in over 100 countries. And today he serves as the president of the Energy Watch Group. So thank you all for joining the panel today. To give everyone a little overview of what's lying ahead, we have 1 hour of time, and after the discussion among the panelists, there will be some room for questions from the audience. So please feel free to post your questions in the chat and I read them out loud. And we're going to try to answer as many questions as possible in the time frame given. One remark, the webinar is currently recorded and we will upload it on YouTube afterwards and share it on social media. So let's jump into the topic. We're amidst a climate crisis. The devastating consequences are no longer abstract, but keep destroying livelihoods across all regions. And as even the Pope put it 2 days ago, the earth is burning. And this is just a preview of what's lying ahead for humankind if we do not manage to turn the tide. And turning the tide does not mean reducing emissions by somewhat 2050. It actually means zero emissions within the next few years. So looking at this time frame, it becomes clear that we have neither resources nor time to lose. And here evolves the questions: which measures are most effective to mitigate climate change? What's latest science take on how to spend resources most efficiently? And how can funders make real lasting impact? And with that being said, Aditi, I would like to pose the first question to you. in your day-to-day profession, you help donors become more confident in giving away their wealth to climate solutions. What are the challenges they're frequently confronted with? And what role do you think does climate philanthropy play or could play in curbing climate change?
Thanks so much, Sophie. It's lovely to be with you all. I guess I'll talk about kind of the role of philanthropy first, to give a bit of context. And I speak on a personal level as well as kind of the thinking that we hold at Impatience and the values that we hold and the work that we do with our clients. And I guess to that, when I and the team at Impatience try to contextualize the climate breakdown, kind of I see the roots of that being connected to kind of moments in history of colonialism, of empires, of like an incessant desire for cheap resources, cheap land, cheap labor, growth at all costs, growth at the expense of communities and the planetary boundaries, right? And the focus is on profits at all costs. And if we hadn't been on this trajectory of this kind of incessant desire for growth and for consumption, if these weren't our roots, then philanthropy shouldn't need to exist at all, right? If our systems, our economies, our democracies were set up and run in a way that allowed for us to live within our planetary boundaries and for all of us to equally thrive within that, we wouldn't need philanthropy. But that's not the case, right? And so what role does philanthropy play and what role should it play? And to me, philanthropic capital is a really great form of risk capital. It's an opportunity for those that have accumulated wealth, be that Bill Gates with his millions and millions of dollars, or be that a small family foundation that has $1 million in the bank that they want to give away, whatever means that they've acquired that money through and accumulated that wealth through, I think there is a big role and a responsibility on them to redistribute that wealth and play their part in undoing some of the damage that the wealth accumulation has created when it comes to the climate and to communities. And so I think one of the main kind of mindset shifts that need to happen for philanthropic capital to be really catalytic in curbing climate change, it needs to be done through like a lens of justice. And that is done through changing the framing around what risk means. So how do we move from seeing risk as something that funders or wealth holders or people in kind of positions of power, whether that's politics, whether that's economics, kind of how do we move away from seeing risk as something that they can tolerate or they can avoid, and move towards seeing it as something that funders who hold this wealth and power and privilege should take on and can take on, right? And so the reality is that the majority of philanthropic capital that exists has been generated in a somewhat problematic capitalist system, right? And therefore it's tainted in some way. And if we really want to transform how philanthropy works for the climate and for whom it works, we need funders to understand the problem behind wealth accumulation and approach their funding through a lens of justice and equality and systems change. And the challenge, of course, is where do you start? These are really big questions. This is looking at systemic change, this is looking at people with wealth and privilege sitting with discomfort, right? And also at the same time deciding, right, what's the most efficient, effective direction to put my money towards. And at the end of the day, climate is an overwhelming space. And I think that feeling overwhelmed and uncomfortable is actually a really good place to start from if you're willing to sit with some of that discomfort. And good things can come once you turn some of these anxieties into agency and action. And I think what we try and do with the clients that we work with, the focus is really on unlearning and relearning the concepts and the constructs that you're holding about climate, and really looking at kind of re-educating yourself a little bit through learning and listening to lived experience voices, to expertise that could be technical expertise, that could be practical expertise, that could be expertise from a farmer who's on the front lines of flooding in Pakistan, right? But don't let that that learning journey make you shy away from acting and taking risk and actually spending your money to try and create change. We kind of talk to our funders about using their privilege and using it timely with regards to the climate emergency, because that's not going to wait for someone to become a subject expert. And there's a real need for collaboration in the space, for trust between funders and grantees, and a redistribution of power as well as wealth when it comes to funding in the climate space. And I think just one last point around kind of the topic of energy transitions, for example, right? If we're seeing philanthropy as risk capital, then why don't we experiment with not using it to fund things that the private sector is already sufficiently incentivized to do themselves, right? Like electric vehicle charging infrastructure. But instead, can we use philanthropy to change some of the plumbing when it comes to the energy transition, right? And so could we use philanthropy to look at large scale kind of divestment from fossil fuels, or funding social movements that are looking to expose the harm that the fossil fuel industry is causing, right? We need to reshape kind of the narrative to highlight the fact that fossil fuel reliance is making us poorer and sicker, and this is material to people's lives. And you could argue that it doesn't, the climate change and the climate impact is secondary, like you're also having a human impact by the reliance on fossil fuels. And so what role can philanthropy play to be really strategic, to underpin and change some of the plumbing that's making the systems and our markets and our economies work in the way that they're currently working? So I'm going to stop it there and pass back to you, Sophie.
Thank you so much. I'm going to shift over to Mark for the beginning. Mark, you've done decades of research on how to counteract the climate emergency. What are the most effective measures to cut emissions on time?
Well, thank you very much for inviting me, first of all. I'm going to talk about what are the best ways to address climate and air pollution and energy security simultaneously. So if we look at the main energy sectors, which are electricity, transportation, buildings, and industry. Well, let's start with transportation. We want to go to electric vehicles, and these could be either battery electric or hydrogen fuel cell electric. A hydrogen fuel cell would be reserved for mostly long distance heavy transport, like long distance aircraft, ships, and trains and some trucks. But pretty much everything else is battery electric. And we have, in fact, and then if we look across all energy sectors, we have like 95% of the technologies we need. And so I'll address the other sectors first. Like, so in buildings, so there's electricity, transportation, buildings, and industry. So in buildings, we'd go primarily to electric heat pumps for air and water heating, for air conditioning, also for dryers, for drying clothes. You can have heat pump dryers. We'd use electric induction cooktop stoves, LED lights, energy efficient buildings, lots of insulation. There's nothing in a building that can't be electric for energy. And so there's no need for gas in buildings. We can transition all buildings, certainly all new buildings should be all electric. And all existing buildings can be retrofitted over time, but hopefully as fast as possible with existing technologies. And this will save people lots of money. There's no reason to have two forms of energy in a building, both electricity and natural gas, for example, because electricity can do everything that natural gas can do, but better and more efficiently. For industry, we'd electrify that as well. Electric arc furnaces, induction furnaces, resistance furnaces, electron beam heaters, dielectric heaters for high temperature processes. And we can transition, some hard to transition industries, they're already transitioning, like steel. There's a process, instead of using carbon for reducing iron ore to pure iron in steel production, we can use hydrogen for that process. And there's actually a steel plant in Sweden that's doing this already, using hydrogen, where the hydrogen is green hydrogen produced entirely from wind, water, and solar electricity. And in fact, this is working so efficiently that the national steel producers in Sweden have all they're going to change all their steel factories to green hydrogen steel. And also for ammonia production, instead of using natural gas to produce hydrogen for ammonia production, we could use green hydrogen. So there's a lot of talk about hydrogen, but we think the only applications of hydrogen should be for long distance transport, steel production, and ammonia production, maybe remote microgrids as well, but not for passenger vehicles, not for home heating, and not for station grid electricity, not because you can't make it clean if you're using green hydrogen, just it's less efficient than battery electricity for those applications. So we should be careful about which applications of hydrogen. And then all electricity we want to produce from just clean renewable sources, wind, onshore and offshore wind, solar photovoltaics on rooftops and in power plants, some concentrated solar power in deserts, some solar thermal for heat, some geothermal electricity and heat, and tiny amounts of tidal and wave power where that makes sense, and existing hydroelectric power and making hydroelectric power more efficient, run-of-the-river hydro. So the clean renewable electricity powering all energy sources worldwide. And this would reduce, if you actually transition the whole world to entirely clean renewable electricity and these appliances I just mentioned, our power demand would go down. End use power demand would decline by on the order of 56, 57%, primarily due to 5 reasons. One is the efficiency of electric vehicles versus internal combustion engine vehicles, the efficiency of heat pumps over natural gas and other combustion heaters, the efficiency of electrified industry, the fact that we eliminate the energy needed to mine, transport, and refine fossil fuels and uranium. In fact, 11 to 12% of all energy worldwide is used just to transport and refine and dig up fossil fuels and uranium. And then finally, some end-use energy efficiency improvements. When you add up those 5 categories, you get about a 56 to 57% reduction of worldwide power demand. That means even if the cost per unit energy is the same, you still reduce your annual energy cost by 56, 57%. But in fact, wind and solar are now the cheapest forms of electricity worldwide on average. And that means you're going to have a lower cost per unit energy. Then with the current system, we do need storage, electricity storage, heat storage, cold storage, hydrogen storage. But we have those technologies available, especially in heat storage and cold storage are already inexpensive. There's water tanks, hot and cold water tanks, ice storage, underground storage in soil, in aquifers, in water pits. And hydrogen storage exists. Electricity storage, we not only have batteries, which are coming down in cost rapidly, but concentrated solar power storage, pumped hydro storage, which is the largest electricity storage worldwide right now, aside from hydroelectric dams themselves. And then there's also compressed air storage, flywheels, gravitational storage with solid masses. My point is we have 95% of the technologies we need, and we know how to get the rest. So we should really be deploying as fast as possible to move the world to 100% clean renewable energy and storage. I'll stop there for now.
Thank you. So I think from Aditi, we've learned that a climate philanthropy has to, or philanthropy in general, reconsider where the wealth comes from and see the philanthropic giving as risk funding, risk capital, and see it through a lens of justice. And then Mark has told us how it's already possible, and that electrifying is a huge chunk of what we have to do, and that it's possible with renewables. So Hans-Josef, to bring it a bit together now, if we look at how funding can accelerate the uptake of renewables, can you talk a bit about that, and what might be the pitfalls also in terms of climate funding?
Yes, thank you for giving me the floor. Risk funding, we see it now a lot in the world with funding the fossil and nuclear system. This brings us to all the crises what we have now. When the world would have gone 20 years ago, the advising from Mark Jacobson and plenty others, Hermann Scheer, myself and other peoples, to go to 100% renewables, we would not see the today's crisis. Not the climate crisis, not the energy crisis, not the inflation crisis, not the health crisis, and plenty more. Therefore, the funding of all the funders must be changed. We must earn money with cleaning the atmosphere, with clean energy, with clean materials, with all what saves us from climate disasters. And when we go this way to earn money with not polluting the earth, but with cleaning the earth, then we would have a chance. And we must look on a scientific view. What are the main pillars there? The view is we must look where comes the emissions from. 60% of all greenhouse gas emissions, carbon dioxide, methane, nitrogen, and others, 60% of them are emitted with the burning of fossil oil, fossil coal, fossil gas. This means the switch to 100% renewables is the core of climate protection. Without this switch, we have no chance. But we have to look also to the other emission parts. About 20% comes from our material use to make a lot of waste and burning the waste. In the end, the emissions are in the atmosphere. Therefore, we must create a clean material way that has no emissions and no waste. And the third point is our agriculture and forestry situation. The intensive agriculture with pesticides, mineral fertilizer and others, and burning the wood, cutting rainwoods and others, emits a lot of greenhouse gases. But this sector, wood and food, can go to a sector that we can clean the atmosphere, that we can take out the carbon from the atmosphere. Plants grow only when they take out carbon dioxide from the atmosphere. Therefore, we have to switch these sectors to a carbon sinking sector instead to a carbon emitting sector. These three pillars are very, very important, and we must go to every pillar. At the end, we should not set a target to have only net zero emissions. No, our target must be that we reduce the carbon concentration in the atmosphere, not only the emissions. Every reduced emissions higher the concentration of carbon and other greenhouse gases in the atmosphere. Our target must be 330 or 350 parts per million of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. And this is possible only with a combination of these three pillars: and carbon sinking, agriculture and forestry, and clean waste system, and 100% renewables. When we go this way, we will have really climate protection, and not only climate protection, we will have no disasters with any expensive energy, because a 100% renewable energy system today, combined with all the storages, with the technologies was Mark mentioned, is today cheaper than the fossil and nuclear system. Therefore, climate protection is not a burden for the economy. Climate protection with renewables is a boost for economy and a boost for the finance sectors to go this funding in this direction.
Are there any direct remarks to each presentation?
Well, I think Hans Josef is absolutely right that, he and many others have been pushing for large-scale renewable energy systems for decades, and it's just there's been a lot of resistance, and there's not only resistance even among supporters. There's just a lot of diversion of funding of two things that don't really work very well. A lot of pushing of greenwashing of nuclear power, for example, and other types of technologies. And so a lot of funding has been diverted. And I think this is one of the reasons we're slower than we should be in advancing, is because we really need to focus on the technologies that we know work, that we know can be deployed quickly. This is paramount right now, is that we have 8 years to solve 80% of the problem, climate and pollution problems we face and energy security problems. And we need to deploy technologies quickly. And we need to use technologies that do not cost a lot. So we should be focusing on things that work and things that can be deployed quickly. Instead, we're focusing a lot on technologies that might be available in 10, 15, 20 years, a lot of times. And this really distracts from the solution. And so I think this is key to keep our eye on the ball, focus on what works, can be deployed quickly, and what is inexpensive. And this is what Hans Josef and many others have been supporting and pushing for years to decades. And so it is a bit frustrating to see that there's still resistance and still people are trying to reinvent the story about what we need in the future. So anyway, I just want to reiterate that we do need to focus on what works.
Yeah, it becomes clear that the technical solutions are there, but we're getting into the direction that is basically the political backbone that's missing. And Aditya, you said earlier that for philanthropy, it makes sense to support where there isn't yet the economic incentive yet. But what could that be? Like, where could philanthropy then support maybe to push this political change?
Yeah, I think I find it really interesting because a lot of kind of traditional philanthropy, when it looks at return on funding and outcomes and impact and things like that, the impact that movements and the impact that campaigning and the impact that kind of advocacy work can have is really kind of discounted, right? And people want to fund technology that they can see, right? This technology that I'm funding reduces X amount of kilos of carbon per year or whatever, right? And that seems much more tangible and you can see your direct contribution. But when we look back in history, if we look at kind of the feminism movements, if we look at kind of Black rights movements in the US, a lot of that work and a lot of that progress has come from movements being funded, because that changes the plumbing, that changes kind of who that democracy is working for, it changes who the system is working for. And I think there needs to be a shift in how impact is quantified when it comes to philanthropy, right? Just because you can't see the direct impact of this campaign that you funded doesn't mean that it's not working. Like, political change, economic change, market change takes a while. You're not going to see the result next week. But if you invest in like a tech product, you might see an impact in a week's time or a month's time or a year's time. And I think there needs to, like, if we're going to talk about system change and if we're going to talk about changing the plumbing, so that the 95% of the tech that is already there to, provide us with green energy, but it's not being deployed, what are the market forces? What are the political kind of policies that are stopping that from happening? And what can change that? And we need to separate kind of movements and advocacy work from this image that we have of, when it comes to climate, that involves you chaining yourself to the airport, right? Or it involves you gluing yourself to the highway. Like, that's not all movements, that's not all advocacy work, but that work is needed for politics to change, for us to be able to deploy the technology that we have.
Yeah, I think we must speak also over time. The climate protection must be highly speeded up, because when we look to the situation today, at 1.2 degrees global warming, we have already disasters, not only in Pakistan. Today, you can see the disasters in Philippines, in Canada, in plenty other regions of the world, where even newspapers do not report about it. But it is terrible for the world. 1.5 degrees. What will happen at it is 1.2 degrees now. What will happen at 1.5? And the global community, the world leaders, decided to stop global warming at 1.5, latest 2 degrees global warming. But they are not on this track. Since they decided in 2015 in Paris, the emissions growth, they increased instead to decrease them. This means that took us the time to go very slowly to climate protection. The World Meteorological Organization in Geneva tells us 1.5 degrees global warming will be exceeded before 2030. We have no time. We must come to a zero emission world with carbon sinking world together, latest by 2030, to stop global warming at 2 degrees. Otherwise, we will go to an uncontrollable hothouse Earth, where humankind, like we today see it, the society and civilization cannot exist. But the positive is, Mark told about it, nearly all the technologies are existing. They are ripe, they are cheap. Therefore, we must go this way very fast. Our Chancellor Scholz made a journey last 2 days to the Gulf region to overcome the energy crisis in Europe with new fossil oil and new fossil gas. This will accelerate the climate warming. President Biden did the same from USA. He was also in Saudi Arabia and begged for new oil. I thought US would have enough oil, isn't it? So USA has enough oil to destroy the climate. Therefore, we must go only the way to 100% renewables in 1 decade, latest. And this is the chance what we have. We can do it. When in Germany, the Renewable Energy Act, what we implemented in 2000, in a time where renewables were very, very expensive, where we had nearly no factories, no manufacturing, and plenty others failed. In 1 decade, we could accelerate it, that we had lots of factories, lots of technologies, and then came Chancellor Merkel and destroyed the growth rates of renewables. They declined it to protect the fossil and nuclear business. When Germany would not have gone this way, we would have 100% renewables today. And we would not must fear that we have no Russian gas or a lack of oil and others. So you see, the combination of the thinking, go to 100% renewables, can come very fast with growth rates what we had in the world. When I remember, laptops did not take 100 years to cover the world. It took less than 10 years. Mobile phones, the same. iPhones, a half a year. And we have the chance to make with renewables and other climate protection technology the same fast track what we learned, what we could do in the world with technologies.
Thank you for putting it in this perspective. Before we go to the questions from the audience, Mark, I would like to ask you, maybe building up on what Aditi said about where philanthropy can come in and funding, looking at the fact, especially what you found in your research, that it's technically possible and even the social and economic costs will decline with 100% renewables. What would be your hint or your recommendation where philanthropy can make an impact, can come in to unleash the transition?
Well, I think first, philanthropy has helped somewhat, or some organizations have, by divesting their holdings from fossil fuels. That's the first step, because part of it is eliminating the funding available for fossil fuels, and the philanthropies of a lot of portfolios of philanthropies had investments, and some have, like the Rockefeller Foundation, for example, divested, and that was very helpful. So certainly redirecting either their investments or the portfolio of holdings into more renewables and storage and electric devices and machines, that is a big step. But also, one thing that, well, if I group in nonprofits with philanthropies, I mean, nonprofits have been very useful for taking science-based energy plans and translating them into policy. And that's also, I think, philanthropies can help with that as well. Because we need, there's one thing to come up with plans for transition, another is to actually enact them, and to get countries and states and territories and cities and towns and provinces to actually first set goals to go to 100% renewable energy, and then to come up with specific plans within each location to do this. This requires some advocacy and support by the public, and because without the public support, policymakers aren't usually going to make a change. So advocacy groups, nonprofits, have been very instrumental in actually implementing policies, because there are over 62 countries with 100% renewable policies or laws on the books in the electric power sector. In the US, there are 18 states and territories that have 100% renewable policies in the electric power sector. There are 180 cities worldwide. There are over 400 cities. And these policies and laws have been pushed a lot by advocacy groups. And some of these are supported by philanthropy groups, or in fact, many of them are. So more encouraging of nonprofits, more encouraging and educating the public. This is the other thing we need, to educate the public about what's possible and what are good and bad solutions. We need to distinguish between good and bad solutions. It's unfortunate, like even in the US, where we have the Inflation Reduction Act, which is very good for renewables, but it also spends a lot of money on the fossil fuel industry on pretend solutions, like what's called blue hydrogen, where you're using natural gas to produce hydrogen, where they claim to add carbon capture equipment, which doesn't address anything, because it just increases air pollution by increasing the energy requirements, and also allows the mining of gas and the leakage to continue without any capture, things like that. There's a lot of money going into blue hydrogen, other types of carbon capture that'll keep the fossil fuel industry alive, direct air capture that'll keep the fossil fuel industry alive, because they use that as a reason not to do anything. There's nuclear power, small modular reactors, keeping existing nuclear reactors open, subsidizing them, although you can take that same money and just replace these reactors with renewables. So we need philanthropies and nonprofits to really help to educate the public about what are good and bad solutions, in addition to advocating for policies to transition to 100% renewable energy.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I think we transition now to the questions from the audience, which are, I think, already more than we can answer, unfortunately, and I have to make some choices. So thank you already for engaging so much. And I will start with one question to Aditi. can you say something about the division or not between philanthropy and political affiliation? For example, I think in Canada that charities were prevented from lobbying. Meanwhile, politicians appear to have full access to the deepest power pockets.
Yeah, thank you. I think that example highlights the problems in our system, right? Like oil companies and gas companies can lobby the government without any restrictions or any kind of limitations, whereas anyone that's trying to fund the other side is limited, is scared off, is disincentivized. So I can't speak to kind of the situation in Canada much, but I think what it does make me think about is the amount of money that's flowing in to change the political standings around renewable energy or policies that work for the climate are nothing in comparison to the lobbying work done by extractive industries. So we need to balance that out. We need to, you know, switch the scale in the other direction, and that may mean really bold actions by foundations, both private and kind of family foundations and high net worth individuals, to kind of take a step that other people haven't, like be bold with their giving, speak out about kind of the restrictions placed by policies within their countries that limit them from doing good work with their money. And so I think there's a piece of that. I think there's a piece around collective power as well. Like there needs to be agreement between foundations of like what can we do with our money to really shift the power balance between the lobbying that's done by extractive industries with the work that needs to be done on the other side. And that money can be used to change political frameworks too. Like how can philanthropy be used to change the framework in Canada that doesn't allow charities to work with kind of lobbying movements and things like that. I hope that answers the question somewhat. I don't know much about Canada, so I can't speak directly to it.
Thanks. Then the next question, can we see sustainable projects that are free of carbon emissions in the coming years, or is it a lack of seriousness in the presence of clear policies that may lead to upcoming disasters due to global warming?
Well, I'll just say, I mean, we do see projects right now in different parts of the world and even in different countries, certain parts of each different countries. There is a lot of progress going on. I mean, I think fully 75 to 80% of all new electricity generation is renewable in most of the world. In fact, I think on average over the whole world. So that's good, but we do need up to 100% of all new generation, not just 75 or 80%. And we also need progress in other sectors. I mean, there's more electrification of vehicles, but that needs to accelerate rapidly. We need to electrify industry. We need to electrify buildings faster. We see bans, and at least, well, in California, we see bans of natural gas in new buildings finally. And in many other states, those are starting to come, and worldwide, you kind of see talk of banning gas in buildings. This is what we need. We need a large scale transition. This means policies put in place rapidly, and we can't just have pockets. I mean, we have South Australia; they're making a lot of progress, but but there are many countries that are not making progress, and so we need equal progress around the world. I mean, China has enough emissions equivalent to about 125 countries combined. And so, unless China is even more on board, they're doing a lot, but they're also pushing fossil fuels still. They have more installations of renewables than any other country in the world, but compared to their emissions, it's still a small potato. It's on the order of 7 or 8% of what they need to do. But other countries are similarly far behind.
Sophie, let me catch up some questions, what I could see. From different people, they asked for the political framework, what we could make. For example, Jose Cordero, say hello to him, and Christina Andreo, Ecosite, and others. It is very important that the political leaders make themselves free from the lobbyism and corruption of the fossil and nuclear system. This was in the last 50 years the main cause why politicians could not find a way to climate protection. Corruption and lobbyism. Funding a lot of propaganda in the world that we could not go to renewables. Renewables would be too expensive. The sun goes down in night. We would not have enough storages. All these propaganda arguments do not sound, but they are in the mindset of the most people. Therefore, we have to change it. The politicians must become free of this influence. And then they can create a political framework that really stimulates climate protection and renewables. We did it with an example in 2000 and it worked. The basic of the feed-in tariff law in Germany was the thinking, the investors must earn money with investing in clean technology and not in polluting technologies. The feed-in tariff stimulated private investment into renewables, and they could grow. On the other side, we have to cancel all the subsidizing from the tax money that subsidize still today fossil and nuclear. $100 per ton carbon dioxide emission for every ton comes from taxpayers to subsidize climate polluting. We have to make a tax system that supports clean technology, renewables and others, and that punish all the polluters. At the moment, it is complete the difference to it. And we have to strengthen the basic what renewables can do. The most important character of renewables is decentralized. Every people in their houses, in their villages, in their quarters, in the cities, can do their own energy by themselves. Energy autonomy is important, and politicians should support that everyone, every company, every people, every state, every village can go to 100% renewables. We have examples in Germany and other parts of the world. They do it already. They are fine. They do not fear the Russian expensive energy. They use the renewables. And we must create an education system, stimulate scientific on universities and scientific centers to strengthen all the scientific reports for renewables and climate protection. And the last point is, we must look clear to frameworks that do not save the climate, but seems to save the climate. In the center stands emission trading systems. Since we have emission trading systems, the emissions increased in the world very hardly, very strong. Therefore, we have to cancel the emission trading system and come to the supporting system like feed-in tariffs and others who really works for climate protection.
Great. Exactly.
Sorry, last point, Ecocide mentioned it here. Yes, we have to bring all the polluters of the world with climate polluters to the justice court. We must accuse them against humanity. They worked against humanity. This is important.
talking about the carbon market, we have one question regarding what role can carbon offsetting play in mitigating climate change? And you already gave a hint, but maybe you want to elaborate more, or someone wants to elaborate more on that, because I think it's a very useful, usual measure when companies or philanthropists look at where to put money. So maybe you can elaborate a bit more on carbon offsetting and how effective that it can be.
Well, I think mitigation is the best direct solution to actually eliminate carbon emissions by replacing the source of carbon emissions with clean renewable energy sources. So offsetting many forms of it, and if the offsetting is going to, like, say we're going to grow a certain number of trees, that's kind of always difficult to account for. So I mean, I think a lot depends on the specific accounting method and what they're actually proposing to offset. But in general, most people are suspicious of offsetting from the get-go about whether it's really greenwashing or not. So clearly, though, we want to replace the emitting sources. That's the first priority. So if that's an option, I think that should always be the first priority.
Yeah, and I think just to add to that, I think in a lot of cases, going down the carbon offsetting route distracts from the need for rapid decarbonization, right? Whether that's of business operations, whether that's of economies in general. And there's a lot of, there's an argument that carbon offsetting markets, it's a new form of kind of carbon colonization, right? It's you're moving your emissions to other countries in the global south that need that income, or it's communities that, you know, will take the money to plant some trees because they need to put food on the table. There's a lot of injustices that are built into the carbon offsetting market, which really need to be kind of looked into and understood, and the market needs to be recreated for it to actually be fair and just for the people that are looking to keep carbon in the ground, versus at the moment it works for the companies that have the money to decarbonize by choosing not to.
Let me just say one more thing. Like when let's say you have a coal plant and the coal company is then trying to offset by, let's say, keeping a rainforest going, that does not eliminate any of the air pollution from the coal plant. So it's really a mask for the problem, which is both combined pollution and climate problems and energy security problems. So a carbon offsetting program doesn't address any air pollution. This is a critical flaw in it. And in fact, this is why even direct air capture is really useless, which is where you take carbon out of the air. You're spending money on that. That does not reduce air pollution one bit. It allows fossil fuel plants to continue, because the fossil fuel plants, let's say they invest in the carbon direct air capture, which they're doing. They're saying they're offsetting their carbon emissions by using direct air capture. Well, even if that were true, which is not, they're allowing their air pollution to continue, in fact, increase, because you need energy to run the direct air capture equipment. And where does that energy come from? Well, a lot of it comes from the grid, where you have fossil fuel plants. So you have more pollution. You have more mining of fuel as a result of the increased energy use. And then what happens with the carbon? Well, they claim most 75% of all carbon that's captured right now goes to enhanced oil recovery. In that process, 40% of the CO2 in enhanced oil recovery goes right back to the air. And who knows what happens to the rest? There's no way to prove that it's actually staying in the ground. So, so offsetting with carbon capture, direct air capture, is greenwashing. It's all it is. It increases air pollution, increases mining, increases fossil fuel infrastructure, and hardly reduces any carbon. And this is the main problem we're talking about, where we have a dilution of solutions. We have proposed solutions that don't actually work, that a lot of money is being spent on, and people are made to think that they are actually helping solve the problem.
I will just underline what Mark said, and Aditi. Carbon emission trading was from the beginning a wrong instrument. Hermann Scher and myself in the German parliament, where it was the first time adopted in the year 2000, we were strictly against it. because we saw that we could not give any allowance for emissions. We must avoid any emissions and do not make any business with the allowance of emissions. We must strictly forbid emissions. The atmosphere is too full with carbon. Therefore, emission trading is a completely wrong system. We have to stop it and cancel it.
Thank you. It's a bit hard to decide which questions to ask because there are some unanswered and they are interesting. But as you mentioned the Global South, Aditi, I would like to maybe summarize two questions. And one of them is, what can the panel say about the African move to climate change and carbon emission reduction? Is it sufficient? And then looking into that in many developing countries, clean cooking from renewable sources is not yet affordable. Should there be a temporary transition through gas cooking, or should philanthropic support a direct transition to electric cooking, which is also a bit in the direction of whether gas is a bridge technology, I guess?
I think we all might have some thoughts on these two questions. But I think on the point around kind of the global south transition, I think there's a piece of like thinking about how do we direct philanthropic capital to places where you can actually rapidly pay for change at scale, or where there aren't energy transitions plans that are up and running. So for example, an increase in funding to enable countries in Africa to build the infrastructure for and reliably access renewable energy could vastly improve energy access and emission kind of rates, but also offer the African nations a route out of embracing gas, as we see kind of Europe turning to gas, to Africa for gas supply in light of the Russian invasion of Ukraine. So like, how do we stop that middle part of the transition happening by using philanthropic capital to put kind of huge renewable energy grids in Africa, right? Is that going to be a better bang for your buck? Is that going to be better return on your philanthropic giving than doing that in Germany, for example, right? And that's a decision that you have to make as a funder, but really thinking about where can you pay for rapid change to actually avoid the stopgap of potentially gas being used. Because if you use that, what's the guarantee that it's not going to take another 10, 15, 20, 30 years for them to be weaned off of that and then go towards renewable energy? And I'll pass it to Mark and Hans-Josef to add in as well.
We have so wonderful solar cooking technologies. We could spread it all over the world. Mostly women die in plenty houses in Africa, in Asia, in South America, because cooking with wood, burning wood, and pollute the indoor air. They die on it, on cancer and others. We have to stop it. There could be a small solution when biogas is produced on a really sustainable way. When the plants go growing and make carbon sinks. And when you really cut every methane emissions from biogas to the atmosphere, then biogas could be a small solution, but not natural gas. Main solution is solar cooking in all the cooking areas.
Would you like to go a little bit in the direction of how the global south, or especially Africa, as it says in the question, is moving towards carbon emission reduction?
I must repeat myself. The target is not carbon reduction. The target is stop all emissions.
Exactly.
I agree with we should eliminate this target carbon reduction. Yeah. Greta Thunberg told it very, very good in Davos. Every small children knows we have to stop all emissions, she told.
Yeah, I mean, air pollution kills 7 million people worldwide. This is not due to carbon dioxide. And this is due to oxides of nitrogen, hydrocarbons, other organic gases, sulfur oxides, particulate matter, like black carbon, brown carbon. And so the word decarbonization should be struck. We need to eliminate all emissions. That means eliminate the source of emissions. And most of the carbon emissions come from the same sources as other air pollutant emissions. So it's really eliminating all those emissions, not just the carbon. The fossil fuel industry wants us to just focus on carbon so that they can then, allow pollution to continue going on and use offsetting and these greenwash technologies such as carbon capture, direct air capture, blue hydrogen. These are all technologies they want to push forward so they can keep mining and burning fossil fuels without any abating. So yeah, it's just eliminating emissions should be the focus.
Thank you. I guess that's a good last statement. To summarize maybe a little bit, I think we learned again that the technical solutions are there, that 100% renewables are possible, that zero emissions is the goal, and especially for climate philanthropy to reflect itself and see it like select the measures to take and support according to this goal of zero emissions rather than emissions reduction. And with that, I thank you very much for participating on the panel. I thank you very much for your questions from the audience, for listening. As I said, the webinar is being recorded, so we will upload it on our YouTube channel. You find everything also through energywatchgroup.org. If you have any questions or if you want to get updated, please send us an email or sign up for our newsletter. And with that, I leave you to the rest of the day or the night. And thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
It was a pleasure with you.
You as well.
Hope to see you again
Yes.
soon.
Have a lovely
Bye-bye.
evening. Bye.